The book of Daniel last week, but we didn't read even a verse out of the book of Daniel. We did a little bit of history lesson on Daniel. We went through, the book is a revelation of Gentile history, and we'll get into that as the book goes on. And it's a discovery of the validation of this book. We went through some of the things as to why. If you can't hear me, we'll turn it up. I think I had a lot of reverb coming off of them last week, but to save you a lot of research, even Jesus Christ mentioned Daniel about 3 or 4 times. So that validates the book. We went over the organization of the book. It's not written in historical order or chronological order, but we're not going to study it in chronological order. We talked about the 3 sieges, and when Nebuchadnezzar finally got tired of it and turned Jerusalem to rubble. And we saw some prophecies in there that come fulfilled to the T. And, I ended the class, and God says what he means and means what he says. There's no gray areas. It's what he says, Anyway, we won't get too much into that. So let's start with Daniel chapter 1. It says, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem, and besieged it. Now, Nebuchadnezzar at this point in history was the king of the known world, okay? And that kind of put it into perspective when we start talking about Daniel and his friends that we read about here. There was no greater physical power than Daniel at that time. Nebuchadnezzar at that time. And for those of y'all I'm getting some notes for, I didn't write out Nebuchadnezzar every time I put it. I put Nebu. So don't get confused. So, verse 2, and the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand. So how did Nebuchadnezzar accomplish this feat of capturing Jerusalem? God let it happen. It was a punishment. If you remember back there, for 490 years, they didn't let the ground rest for a year. Every 7th year, they're supposed to let the ground rest. Well, for 490 years, they didn't do that. The people of the Jewish people. So God said, "You owe me 70," and he got his 70. But anyway, so the only way this happened is because God allowed it to happen into his hand with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels unto the treasure house of his God. So, if you read about Shinar in the Bible, it's talking about Mesopotamia in there. The land of Shinar is Babylon at that time. Sometimes it's referred to as the cradle of life. But we'll get into that as we go through the book of Daniel. Verse 3 says, and the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princes, children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, and skillful in all wisdom, cunning in knowledge, and understanding science, and such has ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. So, what Nebuchadnezzar did when he conquered a nation, he took the cream of the crop, and he trained them. He wanted to take them out of the element that they were in, and raise them, brainwash them, whatever you want to say, till they became like the Chaldeans or the Babylonians. That's what he was looking for. But he wanted the cream of the crop. The northern kingdom of Israel fell about 200 years prior to the Assyrians. But the southern part, which was also called Judah, so when that fell, the Levites from the northern kingdom fled to the south to Judah because that's where the temple was, along with the tribes of Simeon and Benjamin and Judah. And all the idolaters, the people that didn't want nothing to do with that, fled north, according to the history I find. So, let me get it right here. Nebuchadnezzar recognized Judah, the southern kingdom, as Israel. And all through Scripture, Israel and Judah are used connotatively. If it's speaking of Israel, it's usually speaking of Judah. And some places, when it's speaking of Israel, it's speaking of all of them. So you got to kind of read between the lines as to discover who they're actually talking about. But here, it's the southern kingdom. Let's see here. Scientifically, the Babylonians were way ahead of their time. Now, theologically, not so much, but scientifically, they were pretty smart. That's where you had the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, and it was one of the 7 wonders of the world. The reason that we have 360 degrees in a circle, 60 minutes to an hour, and 60 seconds to a minute is from their hexadecimal system that we still use today in geometry and trigonometry. So they were pretty smart, scientifically. Anyway, verse 5 says, "And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years." So these people are put into a program for 3 years. And they're taught the ways of the Babylonians. They are fed the food of the Babylonians. And they're essentially trying to make them become Babylonians. But it's a 3-year program. That at the end thereof they might stand before the king. So, now we're not talking like the food that me and Sally eat every day. We're talking about a buffet every day. We're talking about a lot of food. Sally's reading this book that a girl she works with gave her. And the guy thinks a lot like I do. If you have not been to a Brazilian steakhouse, you are not yet ready to die. That was one of his quotes, because me and Sally and Jimmy and Vanessa went one time to Asheville. And that night they had 10 different kinds of meat. And they give you these little cards. It's red on one side, green on the other. And as long as it's green, they keep bringing you food and piling it on your plate. It's not big portions so it doesn't get cold. And if you get too much on your plate, you flip your card over. I ate for 3 hours. Huh? Always. I eat mass quantities. I'm a mass quantity consumer. But the owner of the place come out and stood beside me and said, "Anything else you want?" I was like, "Yeah, since you was here." But on the one in Asheville, on the salad bar, they have shrimp, they have smoked salmon, cheese, wheels of Parmesan, cheddar. I mean, me and Sally might do it once a year. It ain't cheap, but dadgone, I get my money's worth. Except one of my customers, and this is totally off the subject of Daniel, but it shows you what's coming. One of my customers supplies food to restaurants. And he came in Thursday and we were talking. And I said, "How is it?" He said, He said, "It's going to get serious." I said, "What do you mean?" "I don't care if there is nothing out there, but there needs to be food." He said, "A 40-pound box of chicken wings that I sold for $35 to restaurants is now $100. He said cooking oil has tripled. And he just went on and on and on. I said, "Well, what's up?" He said, "Well, since the shutdown, a lot of these meat packing companies either closed or laid people off." He said, "Well, now that demand's back up, they are trying to get everything back going, but there's nobody to work. So that drives the cost of what supply and demand. So that drives the cost of things up. So we may see some strange things that we've not seen in our lifetime. I hope not, but anyway, We're talking the King's Buffet here in verse 5. I mean, this is some good food. It says, now among these, verse 6, now among these were of the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names, for he gave unto Daniel the name of Belteshazzar, and to Hananiah of Shadrach, and to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego, trying to change their identity. Okay? Daniel's name in Hebrew its meaning was God is my judge. So Belteshazzar means Prince of Baal. Hananiah's name meant beloved of the Lord. Well, they changed his name to Shadrach, and it meant illuminated by the sun god, trying to change your identity. Mishael, his name meant who is as God. And they changed his name to Meshach, and it means who is likened to the moon god. And if you go by the moon god back into ancient times, about the time this was happening, some people, that's where the name Allah came from, but it's not directly tied to the Allah that you were dealing with today. But there's a lot of confusion about that. So Azariah's name meant the Lord is my help. So they changed his name to Abednego, and it meant servant of Nego. Nego translates to Lucifer, trying to change their identity. Jesus is trying to do the same thing to you and I. He's trying to change our identity from what we were to what he would like us to be. I don't do so good at that sometimes. And he's also, as he's doing that, he's trying to change our final destination, which is this world is not our home. We're just passing through. But the world we live in, we're constantly bombarded by things that's contrary to what God would have us to be. Constantly bombarded. So you just think about the position that these young men were in, and we're going to get into that a little bit as we go on here. Verse 8, it says, but Daniel purposed in his heart. Right there is what changed the whole scheme of things. That's what changes the whole scheme of things for us. When we purpose in our heart either to follow Christ or to follow self, that can change the outcome greatly. But I believe that right here, when Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank, therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. I believe that when he purposed in his heart right there that he was not going to partake of the king's buffet, that I believe God decided that he's going to help Daniel. That's mine. There's nothing here that really says that. I'm just saying that's what I thought. Okay, we're going to... And what that would do was when he purposed in his heart that he was not going to do this, God gets glory from that. These people are paying attention. So he didn't want to take part of the king's meat, so we'll go into that a little bit on kosher food. This is not a call to be a vegetarian. Thank the Lord. The meat was probably not kosher. There's nothing, the kosher laws were then, and we're going to go a little bit over the kosher law, but I don't think that's the number one reason why, but we'll hit some kosher stuff right here. Kosher meat, red meat, comes from animals with split hooves that chew the cud. Okay, and that's goats, cows, sheep, no pig. Pig don't chew the cud. It has a split hoof, but it don't chew the cud. So, bacon and sausage. But anyway, so And if you want to know what chewing the cud is, you can ask me after class because some people may not want to know what that is. So the Jewish dietary laws govern the manner of slaughter as well as the tools that are used, and it has to be certain people that do the slaughtering. And this is a deep subject, so we're just hitting the high spots. Let's see here. You couldn't use certain types of fat, nerves, and no blood. They are not kosher. Dairy has laws governing it. Then you get into another class of food that is, I don't know how it's pronounced, but it's spelled P-A-R-E-V-E. I'm assuming it's pareve. But these foods that are not meat or dairy, but eggs, fish, fruits, vegetables, pasta, coffee, stuff like that. But you cannot have a dairy product with a meat product. That's kosher. That's not kosher. So meat and cheese, which I love, don't go together. Milk, you don't drink milk with your meat. Look at Carrie back there raising the eyebrow. But I'm running across this fact too, statistic, fact, whatever. Humans are the only mammals that drink milk after they're weaned. Whatever. You can't even put dairy products and meat on the same plate. They can't be prepared with, they can't be moved around with the same utensils. The fish has to have both fins and scales. So that kills catfish. I love catfish. Hook fins. Yeah. But now carp's a bottom feeder, but it's got fins and scales. Tilapia is just a farm-raised carp. So, and I like some tilapia, but whatever. It's just things, we don't catch on to a lot of these things because we don't understand their traditions and how they work. But like I said, this is a man, there's pages on how this is supposed to be done. I just wanted to bring forth some things. No shellfish, no crab, no shrimp, no lobster. Oh my goodness. I think the first time that me and Brother Jimmy went out to eat in, 15, 16 years ago together, we went to Red Lobster Shrimp Fest. And he's sitting there just watching. I said, what are you doing? He said, Brother, I have heard you can make sparks come off a plate. I said, they'll be coming off your plate in just a second. I think I probably ate 300 plus shrimp that night, you know. And the next time we went, the little server, I told him, they bring you your second serving like in these little sampler things. I said, you're going to have to bring us plates of food or your little legs are going to be tired. But anyway, he caught on pretty quick. And there's very few cheeses that are kosher. And there's a whole big section on why it's not kosher and what has to be in it and what can't be in it. It's complicated. So if we were, and I've talked to Sally about it before, to try to eat a kosher food diet, not just eat what they would eat, maybe not prepared kosher or nothing like that, but just to see what it'd be like. But Lord, you'd have to change your whole routine as to what you shop for and all that, and no sausage. Oh, it'd cut way down on the variety, But now here's what I think the reason that he wouldn't take it. In those days, it was customary, before they served the food, they offered the meat unto idols. And that is a no-no according to God. That's forbidden. And I believe that was Daniel's big hang-up, not so much the kosher, and I'll tell you why as we get on down through here. Okay, verse 9. Now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of eunuchs. Because Daniel purposed in his heart, I believe God's already starting to show him favor here. Okay? Verse 10. And the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who hath appointed your meat and your drink, for why should he see your faces worse liking than the children which are of your sort? Then shall ye make me endanger my head to the king? He had reason to fear. Nebuchadnezzar could cut the head count down real quick, and he was notorious for that. He was known that if you did something against him, he would kill your children in front of you and then put your eyes out. That's history. He would turn your house into a dunghill, and we get into that in chapter 2. He roasted officers over fires. That's in Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 22. So when Daniel is making this stand that I'm not going to do this, he's not only endangering his life and the lives of those with him, he's endangering this eunuch's life. You know, and this eunuch has right to be scared. So, let's go on. Then said Daniel unto Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. Pulse. We'll get into that in a minute. Let's see here. Then let our countenances be looked on before thee, and the countenances of the children that eat of the portion of the king's meat, and as thou seest, deal with thy servants. Pulse was vegetables, herbs, seeds. Now, whether it was prepared kosher or not, I would say probably not, because of where they're at. So that's the reason I don't think that the kosher was a real big thing. I think it was what was offered unto the idols is what shut Daniel down. Don't know that for a fact. Says, so he consented to them in this matter and proved them 10 days. And at the end of the 10 days, their countenances appeared fairer and fatter and flesh and all the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. Thus Melzar took away the portion of their meat and the wine that they should drink and gave them pulse. Let's see if I'm missing anything. Nope. And as for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom. And Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. And the word learning here refers to books or letters, is what the definition was. So all learning, so all books and letters, God gave them knowledge. All wisdom, and all wisdom then was considered science or folklore, because that's how things were moved around, was by word of mouth until, all this stuff didn't get wrote down. There's some folklore going on in our society now. I mean, people look up at the night sky and don't believe in a creator. They just don't. I don't know how you could not. But I got a video y'all would like to see on that. It's pretty, this guy takes astronomy in the universe and explains God through it. It's neat. And it shows you how big God is. I mean, it's makes you feel just tiny. Let's see what else we got here. So, verse 17, it appears to me that right here, as Daniel spoke up back here in verse 8, it looks like he has become the leader of this group of people, and they've thrown in with him. And God is showing these 4 favor. He's given them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. So God's showing his favor to them here again. Verse 18, now at the end of the days that the king had said he should bring them in, then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. And the king communed with them, and among them all was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king required of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. That was because, in my opinion, they purposed in their heart what they were going to do. They was going to serve God, regardless. But, these people had some qualities about them that, let's talk about them. We had discernment. Discernment is able to judge between truth and error, right versus wrong. And that's in Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9. Okay? So they had discernment. They had a resistance to evil. Just the very fact that that meat had been offered to idols was evil to them. Okay? And there's some things on this in Matthew 10, 26 through 28, and James 4 and 7 talks about evil and some resistance to. They had perseverance. They stuck to it. That's something I see lacking in today's society very much. You had to, I've probably told y'all this before. When I was growing up, my dad had this old tool truck. And if he sent you after a tool, you came back with a tool. You didn't come back empty-handed. It was bad times. You came back with something if it was the wrong thing. You came back with something. Determination. That determination, I believe, caused him to purpose in his heart what he was going to do. And where did they learn these things? They learned them at home. Homeschooling is the only schooling according to the Bible. It's not somebody else's responsibility to teach your child. And how the public school system come into being, I don't know. We won't get into that mess. But when they're at home, I look back at my life and all the people around me, for the most part, were older than I was. So I was able to pull from what they knew and probably learn from things that they shouldn't have done. And I said, maybe I shouldn't do that. But we're sending kids to school to be in a group of their peers. Well, that's like the blind leading the blind. And I'd never really thought about that much till last night when I was reading on this. Because I don't have any children. I never thought about it. But my dad, I've always gravitated towards people that were older than I was because I figured they'd made it that far. They knew something I didn't. But now, not that I wasn't, no, I wasn't a good child. You can ask Carrie. That's when I started gravitating towards people that were my age is when I really started messing up. But they learned these things at home. And God lays out stuff in there. And I think it's in Deuteronomy. I'm not positive. I didn't look it up, and I'm sorry. What you're supposed to do, what He expects from generation to generation, what He expects you to do with your child. And I don't think it matters. I think if it's anybody under your roof, I remember, it might have been some guy come to see Carrie one time. And his britches was hanging down here, and Dad pulled his britches up and took him to his car. He said, when you learn how to dress, you can come back. I don't know if that boy ever showed back up. I'm just saying, if somebody's got to teach him, and sometimes it's not going to be easy. It's going to be confrontational. It's just the way it is. And I have some confrontations with 50-year-olds sometimes. We got to stand. And there's coming a time we're going to have to stand. And we better have something to stand on. Like I said, for the first time since 1937, they took that survey of people that attended a house of worship or connected themselves to Christianity was down to 47%. We're now the minority. So you can see the direction the country's heading unless something changes. And God can change the hearts of kings. It tells us this. Okay, let me get on down through here and we'll get this. Daniel also did this with meekness. And you can't hardly find this definition anymore, but I got an old dictionary. And one of the definitions of meekness was describing a domesticated stallion, power under control. Now you think about how meek Jesus Christ is to hang on a cross. Now you think about that. Take a beating and hang on a cross. And all he had to do was speak. That's meekness. Power under control. Read Numbers chapter 5. Numbers chapter 12. Just read that chapter. That'll give you some meekness on Moses. Daniel exhibited good sense. And Ezekiel 28:3 talks about that. Proverbs 2:11. There's all kinds of things about good sense in the Bible. The time we live in now, common sense is no longer common. It is pitiful. The people I deal with every day that I don't know how they got there. It is pitiful. Common sense is no longer common. Their lines are so blurred. When me and Sally was talking about this last night. When we were growing up, you had Wonder Woman. Now the kids today have to wonder if it's a woman or not. It's awful. But there's coming a time that we're going to have to stand. And it ain't going to be easy. And I was just listening to the preacher on the way to church this morning. He said, I have lived to see the death of evangelism. I get it right. I have lived to see the death of evangelism. He said, because it's got too hard for people. He said, they want it to be easy. He said, they want the people to come to them. And then when they come to them, they want to do it their way. Not God's way or the Bible's way, but their way. He said, I'm telling you, I have lived to see evangelism die. He said, and if there's one thing that God expects of us is to tell people about Him. It don't matter if it causes a confrontation. If it does, I don't argue the Bible. If they want to argue, I just walk away. Because I don't do good when I get too aggravated, so I just walk away. But I guess the thing about it here that I want to get across is Daniel purposed in his heart what he was going to do. And we have to do that every day we get up. If I start my day off purposing the right purpose, it goes much better when I forget about purposing the right purpose. Don't get so busy climbing out of bed getting ready to go to work that you forget what's important. And it's so easy to do because our lives are so hectic. Mine right now is a hectic train wreck, but hey, we'll get through it. It won't last forever. So we'll stop there. Let's finish this last verse. It says, and Daniel continued unto the first year of King Cyrus. And there's a prophecy on that gets fulfilled. It's very interesting when Cyrus shows up on the scene.